The plan is to have the potential new ramp on the southwest corner of Waterfront Park. And that whole area's got seagrass. And we had a bunch of issues with seagrass during the dredging process. I guess one of the things wanted to make sure that the council was aware of is of those challenges that we had as far as getting the permits approved and being able to go through that seagrass to build a ramp may be highly problematic for any proposed changes that we're in process of discussing. So wanted to highlight that and have any discussion around that. The other thing around the permits is that we were concerned about extending them, and back at the time we had this discussion, they were all extended through concurrently October 1st of 2015, and this is 2015, and wanted to make sure that if we had a chance to extend them again, or if we haven't already started that process, to make sure we're going through that. So those were a couple of items around the waterfront dredging piece that wanted to make sure we had some discussion about it because of all the work that we've done over the years. Certainly don't want to lose them. So those were the main items that I wanted to bring up to you, Chairman Massad.
Okay, I would expand upon that. The best I can tell, the elevation from where we would build this ramp to the water level is 10, 12 feet, through mangroves, through seagrass. I don't know what the cost is. Do you have any idea, Tom?
Could you repeat that? I couldn't quite understand what you were saying.
Well, we had, Mr. Roth had said we assumed that the southwest corner would be where these proposed ramps are going to be put.
Well, no final decision has been made on either moving the ramp or its location. That would be a decision made by the City Council at some date in the future. Obviously, I would think that if indeed that does happen, we would select a location with the least amount of environmental impacts and or mitigation that would be required. So that decision is yet to happen. With regard to the seagrass, I'm familiar with the area. I don't believe we could do it without impacting some mangroves. However, that can be mitigated. And so what we have done is this. We have filed a multi-year implementation plan for the Restore Act money, which included the implementation of the dredging project that would dredge Channel 1 and Channel 18. We have yet to complete the public notification period that was required for the Restore Act money. That's being done by Pasco County. Additionally, we will need to enter into an interlocal agreement with the county. That has yet to be done. The money is anticipated to be available after October 1.
I'm sorry, the agreement with the county needs to be reached for the dredging or for the
Restore Act funding
to be used or to be designated? Because I thought we already had the Restore Act funding.
No, we don't have it yet. Okay. It will be available after a negotiated and approved interlocal agreement with the county is done. That's expected to take place over the next several months, and our schedule depicts that the money would be available to us after October 1.
Okay, Tom, I can't wrap my head around our reasoning. We're closing Nix Park. The proposed to close Nix Park and those two ramps. Is that correct? Am I correct?
That's being discussed, but no final decision's been made.
Okay, well, I'll throw this out for the board. I don't understand if that's discussed what the point of closing the park and 2 ramps and then building in, that are already there, and building in a mitigation area 4 ramps, so you got a net gain of 2, but the expenditure to get 4 ramps in that park is gonna be more than I think the total funding.
Well, we haven't certainly got that far yet. There's been no decision or even proposal to build 4 ramps.
I thought I'd read something about phase 1, 2, 3. I apologize if I'm wrong on that one.
Another comment I wanted to make, we did send a letter off requesting that the permits be extended that expire this year.
Thank you.
They expire, I believe, in October.
Right.
And we sent that letter about a month ago to the regulatory agency. We received notification that they're reviewing our request to extend them.
To what time frame are we requesting, or is that their decision?
That's their decision.
I see.
Routinely, it's 5 years, but I don't know
Oh.
now what happened.
Okay.
And there, I think it will be a chance that they'll want to revisit how much seagrass is available, you know, redo all those studies. I just hope not.
Well, Chairman Masada, if I may ask.
Yes.
Just, can we have some discussion here at the board for a minute? Because you've got a lot of experience with the dredging process. Did we have much of any seagrass mitigation approved in our permits?
No, and I tell you what happened was, there was a shoal on the river, where those, the 2 big, 5, sail, what do you call it?
The big sailboats are by American Marine there?
Right, well, down from Point Pleasant or east of Point Pleasant, what are they called? Catamarans, giant catamaran.
Big cat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That whole show we had proposed to put in, in the deal as per really Mr. Priest's request, and that had so much, it doesn't have much seagrass, but they considered it that much, that tossing it out reduced the mitigation to, don't quote me, 1 acre, 2 acres, as opposed to 40 acres if that was in. So they're very, they're serious about the mitigation, the amount of mitigation per square foot of seagrass, if you will.
Gotcha. So there is some mitigation in the current permits, to your knowledge?
I believe so, Tom. Do you, or Terry, do you remember? I don't remember how much. I believe there is some.
Yeah, there was some.
Some, okay.
So, and this ramp thing is gonna raise the dead, I think, but
Well,
that's up to you, the council.
I've heard some comments more concerned about the process, the construction, because of the elevation being so high at waterfront there. Practicality on larger boats, depending on what size, trying to launch, because I know the current ramp has issues if you get up to above 30 feet on a sport fish or deep V kind of issue. So the grade and backing down, there's some major challenges there based on the deed associated with the property. I don't know what latitude is necessarily there, but with the mangroves and the other, so any part of the waterfront on Miller's Bayou, there's significant dredging that have to be done to accommodate depth in that area because it is so flat. I mean, it shoals right there across from Gill Dogs. So when we're having the kayak races, I know you cut that corner and you're on the ground on a kayak. And the way the plan's approved for Channel 18, it's very narrow there coming out of 18 into 1.
Channel.
No, 1 is Shrimpers and then
Oh,
18 is
Gill
Gill
Dogs,
Dogs, but it
okay.
tapers down. The only approved area is very narrow. I would say it's probably not more than maybe 20 feet. So that whole area, I don't know why it's constrained in the permit, but I'm assuming is because they didn't want to impact the shoals that are going up to the mangroves there. So I think the main thing that wanted to identify is that there may be significant barriers to having a project shovel ready if we do indeed receive funds in October of 15. And given the long time frame we had to get approved for our permits, we think I believe it's prudent to move quickly on this if we have any intentions to have anything shovel-ready in the October timeframe.
That is not envisioned. The money will be available over a multi-year period, and it's anticipated that should the boat ramp be relocated, and once again, there's been no final decision on that, that we would do preliminary engineering necessary to qualify for a Florida Boating Improvement Fund grant, which would likely fund 75% of the cost of the new ramp. And then, like I mentioned, it's not intended to be shovel-ready. And we would need to complete that engineering work with funding that would become available October 1.
Gotcha. I guess one other thing, I know, Tom, you came on board, and Tammy may have knowledge about this as well, especially since we're submitting these permit extensions. But have we submitted any quarterly updates to DEP on the dredging from 2011 that we were obligated to do under the permit?
I would have to get back with you on that. I'm not, I believe that they have been submitted on our behalf by Joe Wagner.
All right, but you're not aware of anything that we have under the city records?
Yeah, we haven't submitted anything, but I believe I recall that there has been some submittals by Taylor Engineering.
I would suggest that we do a follow-up. The other thing is Mayor Taylor had brought up talking about different types of dredging techniques, and as I'm sure you're aware, the current permit does not allow for that. And any changes that we do in the type of equipment that we want to dredge with, we have to go back through the permitting review process. So, and most importantly, I guess, because we looked at initiating the dredging more on a complete basis, the DEP has got a $46,000 initial cost for the dredging associated with all the channels because of percentage. And if we're going for only 2 channels, I'd hate us to be out 100% of that total front load that DEP expects from us. So if that hasn't been looked at, I would highly encourage that to take place.
So, can you make that more concise?
Sure. What it is that DEP issues a permit to municipality or anybody.
Right.
And then as a permit fee, if you will, to be able to dredge the state lands, they send you a bill, and you're obligated to pay that before you can put any shovel in the ground. So the current one is $45,691.38.
That's our
Front-end cost can't do
To-go
anything
fee.
until you pay the state that. But I'm assuming
Is
that's
that paying
predicated.
for what's removed?
It's paying for what we have proposed to the state to remove, so it's based on the total piece. But if we're only looking at 2 canals in a reasonable time frame, I would work to renegotiate that in the front end so the city doesn't have to pay that and on something we won't need for maybe some number of years. So I just had gone through the permits. I was concerned about the dates. I know we extended it once. My understanding is their graciousness reduces over time. So I think as much as we have our T's crossed and our I's dotted, we bode a lot better with state agencies, and I'm not sure where we stand with Army Corps on that, because again, theirs are limited as well.
I can make a little bit of a comment on the Army Corps. Basically, when I was digging through this for years, doesn't care much what happens in canals and anything off that river.
Mm-hmm.
So we're pretty
Okay.
free with that.
We've sent letters to both DEP and the Army Corps requesting extensions.
Okay. And Army Corps, when we got those, it was basically a phone call, and they really just weren't concerned if it didn't occur in that river. in my experience.
So
Any-
in summary, I guess, Mr. Chairman, we're thinking about, we have concerns about the channels 1 and 18 because of the potential impact to any proposed waterfront activities around the boat ramp. And we would encourage certainly addressing the seagrass and mangrove and elevation issues to make sure it is a doable project within reason.
I think
And
that
to date, we
comes
haven't heard
through-
anything.
I think that comes through, like, permitting. We have to get permitting from the state in order to do things in that waterfront park, like
Mhm.
build a
Well,
boat ramp.
yeah, that's a
So
multi-step.
That'll come, yeah, that'll come later if we,
Well, I'm hoping, and I don't know, Tom, or Terry, that we will not have to permit these proposed ramps before we're allowed to dredge 1 and 18. So chronological events, I would say, this would be my thought, is address the 48,000 if we can. Address the seagrass issues and the mangrove issues if we were putting those in. And be able to go ahead since we have permits for 1 and 18.
We can do that.
That can happen?
Yes.
All right. Any other comments, Mr. Rowe? Okay, we can revisit any of this.
Sure.
We have FDP Waterways Signage Permit Recertification, and that must be yours.
Yes, I put this on the agenda, or I asked for it to be on the agenda, because we're at the 3-year mark, and we're obligated under the permit to submit our information on all our waterway signs. And it's a fairly extensive process. I'm sure Mr. O'Neill may be familiar with it, but in case he isn't, we have to go and survey all the existing signs that we have up. We have to take photographs of them, and we have to provide that survey back to the state for our permit to remain in force. So I know to date we have a number of discrepancies that I imagine that we have not submitted to the state and rectified those, because from a discrepancy standpoint, any signs that aren't correct, they're supposed to be reported in 7 days, and they're supposed to be remediated within 30 days. And we've not done that to date. We've got two biggest concerns from my standpoint is we've removed the buoys that are near the park, Olsner Park in Miller's Bayou, right down from you.
Yeah.
And they're navigation hazards now because there's no buoys associated with them, but the anchors are still there. So somebody running along can have their lower ends taken out because we haven't done that. But all of those discrepancies, all the signs that are, I know some signs were placed and there's still discrepancies under the permit. And I think we certainly want to get those resolved before we resubmit our and satisfy our triennial obligations to the state around that. So that's the main thing around the waterway signage.
Just as a comment, we authorize Water Ventures to go and replace this signage or change the location of the signage that was set forth in the permit. That work has occurred with the exception of one item. That's only the sole item that I believe has yet to be addressed, and that's the replacement of marker 12 out to marker 10A, and that's going to require an ordinance change. I've asked the city attorney to work on that.
Yeah, the new signs have been replaced, particularly around 26, are installed incorrectly.
Okay, I'm gonna.
You got square regulatory signs on triangular posts, and the Coast Guard prohibits that. So we're still we have discrepancies out there.
Okay, I'm gonna point this at the three of you. I don't know much about signage other than I know how to get to the river. But I went out yesterday, came in, the last red marker, the one we use to go across Shrimper's Channel, which would be just in front of Colaquitas's old house. Are you familiar with where I'm talking? There's nothing on that. There is no triangle, nothing,
Oh, you're talking about near the turning basin.
turning basin. If,
When the turning basin,
Hooters,
right, it's right there.
yeah.
That's 34, if I may.
Oh, yeah.
The Coasties were in here the other day. They're in the process of replacing 34.
Okay.
So the I-beam's
Right.
there, it just doesn't have a mark on it. But we don't have any signage on that, ours is on 36. But the red day marks that we had approval on, we just placed them incorrectly. So I'm sure we don't want any discrepancies there. And the discrepancies we do have, I would encourage us getting them resolved prior to resubmitting, which is due in June of 15.
Mr. Roth, could I ask you to be so kind to do me a favor? And I've taken as many notes as I can, but could you reiterate that in black and white for me on an email so I can have more
Yeah.
focus,
Oh, sure.
please?
And if you could tell me which signs that you believe are incorrectly placed or the wrong sign is there, I'll be happy to address that.
Yeah, I think just to expedite the process, I would encourage that the city goes out and maybe does some quality control on the work that was done, so we follow the terms of the contract. Because as you know, we've gone through this process a couple iterations, and we still are struggling to get it correct, so there's.
Well, what I'm asking is if you could identify the signs and the marker numbers, I'll be happy to look into
Yeah.
that.
The new work that was done since our last meeting. The work that was contracted for by Water Ventures
If
in
you could
2014.
specify what you believe is incorrect, I'll be happy to look at it.
Okay.
All right, and we will move on. All right, for purposes of our hard copy, we would like to just advise the council of discrepancies on the signage permits, and the buoys at Osner Park are not
The
there,
anchorage.
and actually the anchorage is, that's very serious for people that are going
Yeah.
back there.
I am aware that the buoys are not there. We think they were stolen. And so,
But we're still obligated to report the discrepancy to the
Yeah.
state within 7 days. And we
Yeah.
haven't done that. We're not following the terms of the permit that we're obligated to follow. It's pretty straightforward. And we
Okay,
have
well,
30
that's-
days to
We need
resolve
to
it.
put
that's the first
something
that
on
I've
it, Tom.
known
If-
of that.
How far below water level do you think those anchors?
At low water, they're visible, very low water. So, but at
So-
high water, you're thinking it's wide open. And
Yeah,
you
we
know
could
how
have-
folks run through there on jet skis or whatnot. It's just
Just from a safety perspective,
absolutely.
and being a boater myself, swimming at Olsner Park, I've often thought that it's just not a wonderful idea. You know, I mean, I'm concerned that there's a lot of hazards in the water other than the buoys, and personally, I would think that if the city takes any further action there, it might be to no longer sanction swimming at that park location and remove the anchorage that's there for the buoys. We can't find them. We don't know where they are. And sometimes people love to have souvenirs like that, and we just don't know what happened. But I will get, you know, the police boat in the water, will take a look at the at what's there and remove any hazards that may exist.
And I don't know who, Chief Brown was the designee in the previous permit, and I don't know, you know, Tom, you've been liaising with the state regarding the permitting. I don't know if you have a designee who's gonna follow up with the signage, but, you know, maybe assigning somebody on a regular basis, so there is familiarity as far as the signs, what is a discrepancy, what isn't, may be helpful.
Well, I would appreciate your input on that.
Problem.
Did we finish?
Yes, sir.
Okay, electric shock.
Okay.
I think we got all you until I've got one that I didn't.
Okay. Basically, over the last several years, there's been significant issues in waterfront communities and stuff having to do with what they call electric shock drowning. And what it is in areas is predominantly built up on freshwater lakes and things like that, but also applies in the saltwater environment. And the reason why I bring it up is we have an issue here locally as far as stray electric current in the water. So certainly with our tidal influence, as there's more fresh water, i.e. lower tides, it's a greater risk to individuals in the water. And at higher tides, maybe not so much. But the general rule of thumb is if you have fresh water in the mix, it poses a severe risk to anybody in the water. And in our community, in our canals, in the river, there are people in the water all the time. It appears to be higher in the canals, but I can't really say. But I reached out to Captain Gupton at the police department, at the fire department, and asked if we had any equipment or provisions, training associated with that, and we do not have that. It has been peripheral discussions on the subject to them, but there has been no formal training to our first responders in this arena. Generally speaking, first responders in waterfront communities are going to have meters to test the water before they enter, so they make sure that the water is safe for them to respond to a rescue situation. So I would highly encourage to the council that we get our first responders the equipment they need. This may include the police department as well, but minimally we have some equipment in the city to protect our first responders on this. So with that, I would hope there'd be training as well associated with it. So this is a fairly significant thing. I also reached out to Sherry Ewald on what type of capabilities we had to do follow-up with electrical installations that are done, because as you know, we have significant number of waterfront lifts, we have underwater lights, we have, and generally speaking, at least in our area, there are high voltage lights that are underwater. In our canal, which is right along Brighton Drive, we have straight current in there. I've got significant electrolysis on my vessel I've never had before. Mine's in the water all the time. Down the canal towards Waterside Drive, you enter the water, there is tingling that goes on, and that's a problem.
You can feel what?
You can feel electric current in the water. The canal paralleling Brighton Drive that runs up to Waterside, in between Island and Brighton. Now, that is just information from people that have been in the water and know what to expect when they have that situation. So there is a severe hazard in a number of our canals. I would suggest we pursue this within the city urgently, because we're coming towards the summer here and more people are going to be swimming. And we figure out how we can either do follow-on testing to any permits that we've issued for people to do lifts. New lifts probably aren't going to be a problem, but we've got a lot of old lifts. And once the electrical installation breaks down or the PVC breaks, there's anything goes. And I just don't want us to have a problem with this. So 2 fronts is what I investigated. That's the information I have. Sherry was unable to get back with me again. The new individual was coming in, so I don't have any follow-up there. I had a nice conversation with Captain Gupton. It was very helpful, but basically said we don't have really what we need. So
Okay, so if we were gonna put this in a nutshell, we're gonna propose that we get maybe training for the fire department or police department and the equipment. Further than that, though, is there any way of testing is there an economical way of testing where this tingling? I mean, but certainly that canal, we ought to do something.
The source can be investigated, but there's a certain cost associated with that. I don't know the process offhand, but it's certainly, if we can get a broader city policy on it, we can come at it from two ends. Making sure it's not taking place. If we have some, to me, it's intrusive if you want to come out and stick a meter in the back of my yard to make sure, but there's some accommodation, I understand, that should be appropriate, but I don't know how to do that under our governmental rules. But this certainly is a potentially serious risk to citizens in the community.
So this could be just done with a meter?
Right.
What could the police, if doesn't take any scientist, right? You can read this?
But yeah, well, Chairman, I believe what we're talking about is to identify, to say Terry Rose Dock is a problem is different than putting it in the water and knowing I need to get a first responder in. I would suggest that those are two different things.
Right.
Right,
So,
but
go ahead, Kim.
the electricity coming from so-and-so's dock can be detected with a meter.
By an expert that knows how to use that meter to say, you know, it's probably an electrician of some flavor.
Right.
Okay, so we couldn't have the police just,
Don't know outside of my flight envelope.
okay. All right, well, you want to table that for,
That's fine,
Coming-
it's something that's been coming up. I've talked to a few people, and I know my personal situation. I've been in marinas all along the west coast here, never had an issue. I've got an issue now.
okay.
And, so,
Okay, I'm just gonna let the council know and say that the Port Authority Board will further investigate. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry?
I agree with having our first responders, trained and have the meters to test the water before entering. I think also that, Sherry Ewald does need to come back up with whether that's something the city needs to be involved with from a code enforcement standpoint, because if you have, electricity running out to your boat ramp that's not certified by water and an electrician,
Right.
you know, then it needs to be addressed. So somehow I think that could fall under Sherry, but
do we want to make a motion to recommend the city and begin investigating this, at least on a couple of fronts? A, to make sure our first responders have some capabilities, and what type of measures we could take from a permit standpoint. So if I made a motion to propose to council on two fronts around electrical shock drowning, one on making sure our first responders have appropriate training and equipment,
Right.
and two, that the permitting department does some investigating to see what can be done to remediate any potential problems.
agreed.
Okay, let me just ask you a question. Do we want to put the burden on the city to do that? Or do we want to look further into what we might be able to suggest they do? Because,
I don't think one's precluding the other. Given the
Okay.
seriousness of the situation, I would not want to be a roadblock to progress
okay,
being made.
so training, equipment, we'll further investigate and suggest city,
Does the same.
okay,
More eyes are better.
okay.
Just for the
Well,
record, I have
Do
the-
I have that as a motion?
Yes.
I have the motion, I used you as your motion to include that the fire department and first responders all have appropriate training, equipment, and the permitting department to investigate and possibly remediate problems involving this nature.
But I wanted to add something. It is a serious potential problem. I read what you have provided to us. I'm still a master electrician and have an inactive license with the county. And I would tell you that a lot of the older ramps certainly probably have unpermitted work and electrical circuits that have been run out for servicing whatever on boats, vessels, docks, without ground fault circuit interrupters, which is the essence of the correction here. There would be an issue with regard to a requirement that the city could impose on older work that was permitted, lawfully permitted long ago and doesn't have a ground fault circuit interrupter on it. However, I think one thing that we can do and that we should do is that we should implement the training on this that you spoke to with our fire department and for them to have any necessary safety equipment to identify if there's stray current in the water, because in saline water that's high in chlorides, the conductivity is far higher than it is in fresh water. And it could be much more dangerous in salt water.
No, that's not true. Actually, salt water is lower risk, but it's still a risk. Salt water actually is greater conductivity, so it distributes the electrical current better than fresh water. Generally, if a swimmer in the water, say for example, is working on their engine or props where you have a hard ground, doesn't make any difference if it's purple water. You're probably in a bad state. But ambiently swimming in the water, not contacting any metal, fresh water is far more dangerous because it's less conductive and it's going to the person in the water. So when there's multiple articles there, I would encourage you to take a look.
I'll read up on it.
At those, but it's enough. I checked the saline levels upstream to see what the influence was, and where we are, you know, I'm guessing we're at about a 30% to 50% saline mix. Still, that means 50% fresh. So that's a problem based on the articles that I've seen.
So it's 30 to 50% fresh versus Gulf.
Yeah, if you were in the Gulf of Mexico, the saline content's about 66%. So
It's about 25,000 milligrams per liter of chloride
Right.
in Gulf water. And it probably won't change too much going upstream unless there's been a lot of rainfall, stream flow in the Cody River.
High rain and low tides
Yeah.
will make it much more.
I've
fresh.
done a lot of chloride testing up and down the river, and I used to test at Sims Park, and because it was kind of interesting, and in like a normal summertime environment, it would run from 3,000 to 6,000, whereas out in the Gulf, it would be about 25,000 milligrams per liter.
Right.
And then there were times when we got extremely heavy rainfall when the chlorides would actually dip below 200
Right.
milligrams per liter at the Sims Park
Right.
area. But regardless, you know,
It's-
I'll run
right.
with this and see what kind of training that we could implement and any testing equipment that they may need for safety purposes
Absolutely.
for the responders.
Okay, let me ask this. Might not be much, but personally, I knew nothing about this. But if the city had sent, and I'm just suggesting maybe we could do this for waterfronts, just for your information, if you have a dock, a lift, lights, whatever, electrical in the water, you may need a ground fault circuit interrupter, and
I think that's,
We could put it in the newsletter.
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, and
Put it in the newsletter,
some
and
posts,
maybe even, if we could, give them 8 or 9 people they could call. I don't know what the policy is on recommending anybody.
Sure.
I guess we can recommend, I don't know, I'd like to know that we were recommending somebody that knew what the hell they were doing.
Or list those folks in the area that are certified electricians for such things
Yeah.
like that.
Tom, what was the name of the circuit that you said?
ground
We
fault.
need it.
Ground fault circuit interrupter.
It's SOP.
Yeah.
And you can send the first one to my house, because I want it done if
Well,
it's
we
not.
put it in the newsletter and,
I think that's a good
you
idea.
know, and it'll, that way it goes to.
So where does that
every-
go? That goes from the line, from the house to the lift, that ground fault circuit interrupter goes at any place, or does it be a certain,
It goes
Well,
at your.
With the electric?
at
Where
the,
you
at
plug
the,
into.
there?
This is
Yeah,
scary.
it's the same type of thing
Huh?
that's in your bathroom that has the button that you push in.
Yeah.
Every
It
time
screws
that-
up all the time?
Yeah, well.
Oh, boy. Okay.
That's the same thing.
They
that
must
would
have
go
a
out
higher
your dock.
grade of those, not made in China, Tom.
But it's not, it doesn't tolerate that happening. So once the incident occurs, it breaks the circuit. So if anybody's in the water, it'll,
Yeah, it's current
But-
that,
Trips it.
leaves the circuit, if you will, and faults to ground.
Right.
In some way, shape, or form. And
Okay.
it
So this
electrocution.
isn't a real expensive, adventure we're talking per owner?
No,
Not to
I wouldn't
fix,
think
no.
so.
but see, the other possibility, depending on what the city chooses to do, is on the waterfront just like the power company does. Here's a ground fault circuit to put in your home, on your circuit. And you've got a $2 investment to people, and it kind of makes an impact. Why am I getting just a box? So there's lots of things we can do, but I think if we investigate it, then we can
Yeah.
see what's appropriate.
I just changed a few out for somebody. And,
Yeah.
Is that?
they're about $25.
It's not the same as what Jen's explaining, like in the kitchen,
In principle, it is.
but it's a more
For example, if you
substantial
had-
thing, I hope.
Your service equipment, where there's a main and various branch circuits, you can install a ground fault circuit interrupter in several different ways. You can install a ground fault circuit interrupter breaker
Right.
that protects the whole circuit, or you can protect an individual receptacle that might be next to a bathroom or kitchen sink.
Okay, so if you were, let's say, and I'm taking mine, I have a lift, you would want one there, you would want one at an electric outlet, well, you could plug in things, you would want two at that.
Yeah, all outdoor outlets now have to be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter.
Right.
But
So
if you
it's
put one on a breaker, it protects everything on that branch circuit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, if you
but-
put one,
To whatever breaker your lift goes to, and you'd be covered.
Okay, but if, they could be at the breaker or they can be at the source?
Yes.
Okay, 'cause, I mean, most of us don't wanna walk all the way to the house and
No, it's-
play with that. It'd be, for me, it'd be easier to have two. Terry, what-
yeah, it depends. Sometimes I've got one on the dock, and I have one on the line back at the house, and every now and then, when we get heavy rains or something, it'll trip that one back on the house. And the one on the dock is still, would be fine. So, yeah, I can trip anywhere along the line, because I know I've had people with houses, and they said they couldn't find their power outage, and I said, well, start looking at your GFIs, because I said somewhere back in that house, there's a switch that popped. And so, yeah, sometimes it just, for some reason, will skip over the initial one and run all the way back to the house and knock that one out. Maybe it's more sensitive. That's the only thing I can figure. But the further back you have it on the system, probably the better, because it's going to pick up any problem that occurs if it's water in the ground coming
Right.
up from the dock or from the boat lift or whatever, and it's running underground somewhere, picks up some water chain, problem there, it's gonna kick it out at the house.
If you'd like a briefing on this ESD thing for council or something, just let us know, and I can put something, 5-10 minutes together or something, that will give them a brief overview and kind of formalize it, crystallize it a little better.
I'll check into the training and the equipment right away.
Okay, and then, yeah, maybe at next council meeting, you
Get
might
some
You think,
blurb it.
it just, the situation that exists is, it doesn't take very much to electrocute somebody.
Right.
And it's measured in milliamps.
Right.
And.
60 milliamps,
Yeah.
heart failure.
Yeah.
That's the end I understand.
There you go, I knew
The
you'd
ground fault
understand
circuit interrupters are designed to cut the power to the circuit far below that.
that. Right,
Okay. All right, that's very good, thank you.
certainly.
Had no clue. I would like, we have any more discussion on that?
No, not on
Okay, I want to bring up something that's not on the agenda at present, but there has been a ramp installed on the corner of Davis and, what's the?
Sunset?
Sunset, yeah, right, to the west of.
Sunset
It's
Marina?
Corman, Sunset Marina. I never get rid of Corman's. I have some knowledge of that, and there's, the people on Davis were, at some point in the past, this best of my knowledge, were, deeded that property right across into the river. And somehow, I mean, it's totally illegal, and I think it needs to be looked into. In order, from my legal sources, in order for a ramp to be permitted that is owned by multiple persons, being 20 to 28 is the closest I can give you. There has to be a homeowners association. A person can't pull that. And I have trouble believing, what I would like to see is that permit pulled. Are you aware of it?
I'm aware of it.
Okay, I had been on the water since it got cold, but, do you have anything you can help me with?
Well, yeah, I had a couple calls on that, from the south side. The question about the permit, and what I was told is that supposedly that land is co-owned by a number of people.
Right, the entire street.
Came with the original deed to some extent, something on that order. So I don't know how that all transpired. I know it went in. And the only thing I said, make sure that they have their permits and everything is in order, because otherwise you're gonna run into problems.
Did you see who pulled that permit? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
As far as I know, I heard Jim Priest had handled that. So that would, I don't know for sure. I won't go on record as saying I know for sure. From what I understand, Jim Priest was the one that contacted the contractor.
I'm sorry?
Jim Priest was the one that got a hold of the contractor.
And who paid for it?
I don't know who paid for it.
I mean, I'm trying to put even a motive together for why would we have issued a permit for a ramp right off Sunset when Jim Priest is the guy that's bitching constantly about Sunset Marina. And so now we've got a ramp for an unknown reason that somebody put money into, and I would have to say, I'd just like to know why anybody would build that and why we would issue an illegal permit.
Well, the permit's not illegal. They've received an DEP and an Army Corps permit, and we issued a permit, but it was lawfully issued. I can't speculate as to why they would want this ramp.
But I'm saying, who could they issue a permit to that is owned in multiple names without a homeowner?
Well, let me just I'll give you a copy of everything.
Okay.
I've got the whole file.
Okay.
And I'm familiar with it, I've seen it, I've been out there. It hasn't been finalized yet, but we didn't have any basis to not issue a permit. And like I say, I can't speculate as to why.
Yeah, well, that's really not here nor there, but if some of the owners are not owners of their own property, there's a problem we have. So, Tammy, could you email me that so you don't have to, whatever you can?
I
Yeah,
would be
sure.
happy to
scan it.
We'll scan it and email you the whole
Can I
thing.
get, okay, great.
Absolutely.
All right, any other things we haven't?
Question?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to verify with Mr. Roth, because he usually does it. Did you want to give a report At this coming council meeting or at the next council meeting?
It's purely at discretion. I think the only thing that I am aware of offhand is we can give a brief update if that's appropriate for,
Yeah, well, I
5
think the
minutes.
upcoming council meeting, I normally
you're-
give the
if you're
reports, I don't
intending-
really care one way or the other, but,
that would,
there is the electrical shock that I think you would be more,
I think awareness is probably all that's really important at this time frame, and then any learnings we have, but at least it brings awareness up to council. So
Okay.
from that standpoint, yeah, I would say that's appropriate.
So I'll just put a reports of board and committees, and I'll list you with your ESD.
okay,
Oh.
you want him, you don't need me to?
Whomever, whomever.
You want it?
Well, I'll do it if you
Okay,
want.
that's fine with me, I have no,
Did we ever
Okay.
get a response from our motion to have council clarify the Port Authority Board's role and?
That actually should be coming up very shortly. We had a discussion on Port Authority Board at the last meeting, and I'm to provide council some information, so that will probably be a discussion at the next meeting.
Well, I did see the last council meeting, and that would be a topic, since we brought it up, I would like to at least comment to, because the extent of the discussion involved around regulatory compliance, and that's front and center on part of our charter. We only have 3 main areas. One's environmental, one's regulatory, and the other one's safety. On the regulatory compliance side, I know we've had a long issue on commercial traffic and stuff. I can't say I've necessarily been in agreement. Part of that is because I have a little understanding of navigation and maritime law and such. But I just will make clear to the council, or Tom, especially for your case since you're here, the restraint of trade or commerce is unlawful under the state of Florida Constitution, under Florida Statute 542.18. And there's penalties for anybody that proposes it, and there's greater penalties of $1 million to anybody advises for it. So for your protection and Sherry's, I would advise we don't recommend anything to council in this area because it's unconstitutional under Florida State Constitution. Secondly, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, specifically precludes regulation of commerce, and fishing vessels are commerce that's regulated under the U.S. government's federal guidelines. So I listened to the conversation. I would encourage that we
may I interrupt? before
Sure.
you go? I did not listen to it.
Oh, okay.
So I kinda don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, we had discussions, several years ago, we had an issue about a shrimp boat in Miller's Bayou, and there was a big falderall associated with it. There was a desire for some regulations associated with it, and Ms. Britton brought this up at last council meeting. There was some discussion about it. And there was an issue whether a Port Authority Board should be involved with it or not. And when I saw that and went back to our regulatory compliance issue, it raised a question. But most importantly, I was concerned for council and concerned for city staff advising anyone about this, because it is illegal to restrict commerce, and fishing is the key. And it's a complicated issue, because if you go into fishing that has to do with our charter boats and all of that, that may not be a commercial vessel, but it's a commercial business. It's a very ugly process, but let it be known that on the navigable waters of the U.S., Florida included, we cannot preclude commerce. It's very simple. And so where you put a boat, what you do with it, that's just the way the rules of the game. And I've had to go get my...
Are we talking about the one shrimp boat that was in Miller's Bayou?
Yeah.
And that caused the brouhaha?
And I think Ms. Britton had some input from some representatives, and I think we just need to clarify this on where it falls, and I'm just bringing this to the table because it's pretty straightforward. It's not an area we should waste our time on. We got bigger fish to fry.
Well, you may wish to include that in your
I
comments.
certainly would be happy
to the
to.
council.
But the part that I was concerned about is that all the council members are subject to $100,000 penalties, respectively, and anybody advises them is $1 million penalty. So, that
Yeah.
would be enough to encourage me.
So the thrust of what you're saying is we do not need to try to pass anything.
We can't.
We can't.
It's
pass it, but
unconstitutional.
I guess we were discussing.
Right.
Yeah, it's,
Which brings me to one last question. I'm sorry, did you?
well, yeah, that's why I threw it back to Joe Public, because I remember the battle, and I mentioned it during the meeting. But I told him, I said, Joe needs to go back and look at that, because those bridges and arguments and everything, the litigation went on and on and on. And it's best just,
It's-
it was very, I think all that work's been done.
It's a major waste of time. Maritime law, admiralty law goes way before Joe. Joe's not really, I know Joe's background, and I just hate to see waste time and effort around it because there's not a darn thing we can constitutionally or legally do.
Okay, a couple of real quick points. If things go as they're proposed, let's say tomorrow, there's ramps and things, into Miller's Bayou. We're gonna have a problem if I've been told that Guild Dogs, and I'm very pro Eric and Guild Dogs, don't get this construed wrong, may want to rent power boats. I don't know if he's got the place to put enough to rent, but Miller's Bayou is wonderful for the kids in the area to ski, etc. But if we start dumping 20, 30 boats back there, it's gonna cause a lot of problems with seawalls and ripraps. And I think you're gonna have to consider making it a total no wake, and I hate to see that happen.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you could restrict whoever's renting those boats from skiing in Miller's Bayou or whatever.
Well, I know we kept the horsepower down on the agreement that we had on that, as I recall. Don't remember what the horsepower was, but it was nothing real major.
I thought it was 40.
Yeah, it was, no, it's more than that.
But it'll still make wake. And I know we've had this discussion before, is continuous wake causes the problem, but,
But I will just.
I don't know,
Again, remind chairman and councilman that our ability to regulate the waterways has nothing to do with how much wake you produce. It's the safety on the waterways. That's really what it's about.
Well, that's probably a future concern if everything were to come together, which I frankly hope it doesn't in respect of making a parking lot out of the waterfront park. But brings up one last thing. We have multiple times advised council that we believe the pier should be dealt with. In other words,
Waterfront
rebuilt
park pier.
at Waterfront Park, the one that's been closed for a year and a half, 2.
Approximately.
Yeah. Tom and we always are gonna disagree on this, but I saw your letter that said, I believe it was Wade Trim had agreed to, that for $42,000 they would engineer a pier. And we're back to that same discussion on design build versus design subcontract build. My opinion, and I want to throw it to everybody, if you have a design build, you have one guy to go after if you have a problem. If you have a design subcontract build, then the architect's or the engineer's gonna say that it was built wrong, the builder's gonna say it was designed wrong. And the fact that $42,000 to design a pier is absurd. I mean, we're really talking about two poles, and how they connect, and ad infinitum, wherever you wanna stop, you make the end. And for instance, I built my house, which is what, 3,500 plus the 3,500 under it. Electric, air conditioning, water, sewer, everything. $5,000 to draw that. They want $42,000 to draw a pier. I find that onerous. Am I the only one?
I don't think we have any direction on that yet. It hasn't moved from its current status, if I recollect. So there's no decision on removal of the pier or a new project, so.
But we have already advised, I just wanted to reiterate that we had advised to redo.
I agree with you from that standpoint, yes. So what the solution is, hopefully we have an opportunity for input on, incorporating some of the perspectives that you bring.
Okay. We don't seem to get that opportunity, so if you decide to make this presentation, then we've got it right there.
Okay.
Well, it's been in front of the CRA 2 times, and I both times spoke to the fact that we need to do something, and a consensus of the CRA is pending. I'm happy to receive direction from the CRA. Fix it, tear it down, do whatever. At one point, we're gonna have to spend some money.
Exactly.
We also have some
But
suggestions from the Bayou Business Association, that they would like to raise some awareness of the pier and some funds that would go into, the materials to rebuild the pier, and they would like the city residents themselves to go out and build the pier once certain things are in place. So, I know that was an option that the Bayou Business Association was looking at, raising some awareness about the pier and some, funds to go towards replacing it.
I think every time that we've entered these waters, we end up, and I'm sure Tom's gonna tell us, that the citizens building the pier becomes a liability to the city, even when we were gonna put signs up on the, okay.
I guess the question, if there's some proposals, maybe either bring them to the CRA or the Port Authority Board around ideas around that, would be
I believe they sent a
beneficial.
letter.
Okay.
If it, just one final brief comment, whatever's done needs to be planned appropriately. And it needs to be monitored, and it also will require environmental permitting.
Right.
And the numbers that you've seen in the Wade Trim proposal include the environmental permitting, which most of the time involves multiple submittals, and it's not cheap to get a permit, as the city well knows with its dredging permit. So I'm just saying, when we do it the next time, whatever we do, let's do it right, and let's make it to where it lasts. There obviously were deviations from the original plans and specs. I learned from going through the file, which wasn't complete, that way back when, nobody currently associated with anything.
Right.
I guess the services agreement was terminated. A new engineering firm was hired. That's always a very difficult process. And more than likely, there were substantial deviations from the plans and specifications, which have resulted in what you see today.
But also it was our duty to follow up and check on them, and we didn't. And that's
Way back when.
past.
Yeah.
We made a motion recommending city council develop potential solutions to replace the pier, and would like to see it used as an example of how the city can obtain bid comparisons from an engineering company to design the project and another company to implement the replacement versus a marine company to design and implement the replacement.
Correct. And I think that's still, and we can look at it from both ways. But I am not sure, Tom, but I believe that replacing a pier, and I don't know how much of it has to be there to be considered just replacing it, might be the ideal thing as opposed to putting 13,000 in to pull everything out. And I'm pretty sure that some of those pilings would still be reasonably safe. But if it would save us from destroying the whole thing and
Having to re-permit
keep
like
us
brand
from
new one.
having to re-permit it, that would be the best
Oh, it would still require a permit, whatever we do.
replacement.
Because there will be a significant number of pilings that need to be reset. So it still will require an environmental permit. We cannot go out there and work and do the kind of work that we're contemplating. And I'm happy to do whatever the council/CRA tells me to do. The only thing I want to do is I don't want to take any shortcuts, and I want to do it right. To where 25 years from now, it's still there.
Okay, any other comments?
The only thing is, I'm going to, if I get reelected, the piers are gonna be one of my pet projects, because it's been 2 years. And now I'm hearing complaints, I got another one today, people going up onto private property asking if they can fish. And that's unfortunate. I mean, evidently, all the land along the river, for the most part, is now privately owned. And the areas where we used to see people fish, on the end of Sunset, there where they used to have the big house, and it was,
Right.
yeah, people used to sit out there and fish all the time, and now that's been bought, and there are no trespassing signs, so
That wasn't city land there as you turn that corner. I always had thought it was. There was always somebody that.
but there's really very few places for them to go that, you know, you can go over to a few of the parks, but it's shallow, and you're really not in the river proper. People want to fish. It's a
Well-
great place to fish, and I think we ought to make it available to them. We have 2 piers, and neither one of them are functioning. I just can't and won't accept that. I want
Thank
to
you.
move forward on that before we do anything else. That's one of the things that we should have been working on. I don't think it's gonna cost as much as all these other things, and I think it's something we should do for the public, for our citizens. So I don't know what it's gonna take. I don't know if we're better off with a floating dock. I mean, we've come a long way with docks. And these floating docks, I've seen some examples of that, and it is awesome what you can do with a floating dock. And I don't think you'd probably have as much problem with the DEP and all that if you're not sinking posts and everything else. The only thing you have to sink a few posts to stabilize it from here and there, but I don't think it's going to have the impact the other ones do. Those are all things we can look
Well,
into.
that might be an answer, but my one thing I would like to see incorporated in this regardless, and I was on the council when that was commissioned, and I raised the objection, oh, but it was already engineered. That pier does not go out past the shoal that it's sitting on. So the kids might catch catfish or 2 at high tide, but it needs to go further. If we're gonna have to re-permit it, we should go out there and see where the shoal goes off.
One comment with regard to the Limestone Drive Pier, the old bridge
Yes.
that's there. I applied through Senator Wilton Simpson's office for a state appropriation. I feel very positive that it will make it into the state budget. It also will be endorsed by Representative Amanda Murphy to rehabilitate that area that is used and has been used as a pier. So if we're lucky enough to get some additional state money on that, I applied for $187,000 to rehabilitate that, and Senator Simpson was very supportive. And so,
Way to go, man.
Good.
That's, thank you.
When was the last time we heard anything from the senator, though?
yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yes. They asked me to send our package to Tallahassee so that, I sent it to Amanda Murphy's office so that she could endorse it from the House side. So that was yesterday.
Sounds
Now,
promising.
it's not affirmative that we're going to get anything. It still can be vetoed, it can be removed, but they were, both of them, I spoke to both of them, and they were very supportive.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Motion seconded.
All in favor?
Aye. Cool.
Okay, that's, meeting. Are you